My name is Mary, and today I'm going to tell you something that most people would never believe if it hadn't happened to me. My own brother ruined my life, and then got my wife pregnant. But even that wasn't the worst part, so if you're here because the title shocked you, let me tell you now you have no idea what's coming. You might think you understand betrayal, you might think you've heard stories of family falling apart, but what happened with my brother goes beyond all of that, so please take a second to subscribe to the channel. We're trying to hit a big milestone, and your support means a lot. And now let me take you into the moment that changed everything. I remember the exact day everything started to fall apart. It was a normal Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee. My wife was upstairs getting ready, and my brother was already sitting on the couch like he had nothing better to do, which was pretty much his usual routine back then. He had been staying with us for a while. He said he needed time to get his life together after losing his job, and since he was family, I let him crash in our guest room. I didn't expect much from him, honestly, but I never thought he would do what he did. I never thought he would look me in the eye every day knowing what he was hiding. So there I was, coffee in hand, looking at him as he scrolled on his phone laughing at something, and I felt this weird knot in my stomach. I didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was my mind trying to warn me, but I ignored it. I just asked him if he had plans for the day, and he shrugged like always. I wish I had listened to that feeling. I wish I had paid more attention to the small things, because there were signs I didn't want to see, like how he always found a reason to talk to my wife when I wasn't around, or how she started locking her phone and smiling at texts she wouldn't show me. I didn't want to be that paranoid guy. I trusted her. I even trusted him. Stupid, right? But that's how betrayal works. It doesn't come at you with warning signs and loud alarms. It creeps in through silence, through comfort, through people you thought would never hurt you. And that's exactly what happened to me. They destroyed my peace from the inside and left me wondering how long it had been going on, wondering if anything I had was ever real. And just when I thought I had the full picture, just when I believed I had reached the bottom of the truth, I discovered something that flipped everything upside down again. And that's what you're about to hear. Growing up, my brother and I were never really close, but we weren't enemies either. He was just one of those people who always needed more attention, more help, more forgiveness. No matter what he did, our parents would always find a way to excuse his behavior, and somehow I got used to that. I played the role of the responsible one, the one who kept things going, who stayed quiet, who fixed the mess he made every single time. So years later, when he showed up at my door with nothing but a bag and a tired look on his face, saying he needed a place to crash, I didn't even hesitate. I opened the door. I offered him food and space and privacy. I thought I was doing what any decent sister would do. He told me he was going through a rough time, that he just needed a few weeks to get on his feet again. And I believed him. I always believe him. I think deep down I still hoped he would change. But some people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. I was already married back then. My wife and I had been together for almost 3 years, and things between us were good, not perfect, but strong. We had our routines, our little jokes, our favorite shows. We supported each other through everything, or at least that's what I thought. In hindsight, there were little cracks, little things that didn't make sense. She started working late more often, started being a little more distant, not cold exactly, just distracted. Sometimes I would talk, and she would be staring into space like she was somewhere else, and I kept telling myself she was just tired, maybe stressed with work. I never once thought it had anything to do with my brother. At first, he stayed out of our way. He slept a lot, applied to a few jobs online, cooked sometimes, and seemed to be trying, but slowly, he started spending more time in the living room, always around when she was home, always starting conversations that felt a bit too casual, too familiar. And every time I walked into a room where they were talking, they would both go quiet, like they had just finished saying something they didn't want me to hear. But again, I brushed it off. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself to trust them both, because they were family, and because love needs trust to survive, right? But trust is exactly how betrayal gets in. Trust is the door you leave open because you think no one you care about would ever walk through it carrying a knife. I remember one evening we had dinner together, just the three of us. Everything seemed fine. We laughed, we shared stories, even toasted to new beginnings. My brother said he had a job interview coming up, and my wife smiled so wide, like she was really proud of him. And for a second I felt happy. I felt like maybe things were finally falling into place. Maybe my kindness had paid off. Maybe my brother was finally turning his life around. But that feeling didn't last long, because a few days later she told me she was pregnant, and in that moment, everything inside me went silent, because something didn't feel right. The timing, the way she looked at me when she said it, it was like she was hiding something or afraid of something. And even though she smiled, even though she said all the right things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And I was right, but I had no idea how wrong I was, and I had no clue how much worse things were going to get from that point on. When she told me she was pregnant, I smiled out of reflex. I said all the things a person is supposed to say. Congratulations, I'm so happy, this is amazing, but inside my mind was spinning because I knew it didn't add up. We hadn't been together like that for weeks, not since a fight we had about something small that turned into something big, and after that things cooled off between us emotionally and physically. So, when she told me she was pregnant, I knew I wasn't the father, but instead of accusing her or demanding answers, I kept quiet for a few days. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what the hell was going on. And during those days, I watched everything more closely. I noticed how she avoided eye contact, how she spent more time in her room on her phone, how my brother always seemed to be nearby, always too comfortable, too casual, too close. And then one morning I left for work earlier than usual, but halfway through the drive I realized I forgot my laptop at home. I turned back, and when I opened the front door, the house was too quiet, and then I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. I walked in, and there they were, my wife and my brother standing close, very close. Her hand was on the table, but his hand was on top of hers, and they didn't hear me right away. They were laughing at something, some private joke I wasn't part of, and when they finally noticed me, they both jumped back like kids caught stealing, and suddenly everything made sense. All the weird glances, all the sudden silences, the random tension, the late work nights, the way she changed the passwords on her phone. And I just stood there staring at both of them and asked one question: whose baby is it? And the silence that followed was the loudest moment of my life. Neither of them said anything. At first she looked at him and he looked at the floor, and in that moment I knew it without a doubt, and still hearing it from his mouth felt like being stabbed. He said it softly, he said it like he was doing me a favor. He said, "I think it might be mine," and everything inside me broke. I wanted to scream, I wanted to hit him, I wanted to walk away, but my body didn't move. I just stood there frozen, and she started crying, saying it was a mistake, saying it only happened once, saying she didn't know how to tell me, and that she was scared, and that it didn't mean anything. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. I had opened my home to my brother. I had trusted my wife. I had worked hard to build a life for us, and in return they gave me this, a betrayal so deep it made me question everything. And when I told them both to get out, they refused. She said this was still her house, and he said he had nowhere else to go. And I realized right there how much control they thought they had, how little they respected me, how little they feared consequences. So I left. Instead, I packed a bag and walked out of my own house because I needed space to think, and honestly I didn't trust myself to stay calm around them. And during that time away, I spiraled. I thought about all the times I defended him, about all the times I believed her. I thought about our wedding day and how she smiled at me like I was her whole world, and now I couldn't look at her face without feeling sick. I stayed at a friend's place for a while and tried to gather myself. I ignored their calls, their messages. I just needed silence, but silence doesn't heal betrayal. It only gives you time to see how deep the wound is. And after a week, I went back, not because I forgave them, but because I needed answers, I needed closure, and I wanted to know what they planned to do about the baby. When I walked into the house, they were both sitting on the couch like nothing happened, like we were going to have some casual family meeting. And before I could even speak, my brother looked at me and said, "I'm going to step up, I'm going to be a father." And something about that sentence made my skin crawl because it was said with pride, like he was proud of what he did, like he wanted credit for being decent after destroying everything. And she just sat there nodding, tears in her eyes, but not saying anything, not fighting for me, not defending me. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a mistake. This was a choice they made together. And I was the one left behind with the broken pieces. So I walked out again. But this time, I wasn't walking away. I was walking towards something because I had a feeling something still wasn't right. And I was about to find out just how twisted this whole thing really was. After that last conversation, I knew I couldn't trust either of them, and I knew I couldn't just let it go. Something in my gut told me there was more going on, so I started digging, not in an angry, screaming way, but in a quiet, focused way, the kind of digging you do when your whole world has already collapsed, and all you've left is the truth. I started with my brother's stuff. He was still living at the house, and I knew all his patterns, where he left his phone, where he stored his files. And one night, while they were both out, I went through his backpack, and what I found changed everything. He had a notebook full of numbers, lists of expenses, strange entries like payment received and meeting confirmed, and at the bottom a name I didn't recognize, Daniel Mendez. The name meant nothing to me at first, so I did what anyone would do. I Googled it, and turns out Daniel Mendez was a mid-level executive at the same company where my wife worked, and he had just been laid off a few weeks earlier under mysterious circumstances. The more I looked, the more connections I found: emails, strange bank transfers, burner numbers. I even found a hidden folder on my brother's phone labeled photos, and when I opened it, my hands started shaking. It wasn't just pictures of him and my wife, it was screenshots of texts between Daniel and my wife, private conversations about money, about secrets, about keeping things quiet. And that was the moment everything twisted, because the baby wasn't my brother's either. The baby was Daniel's, and Somehow my brother had found out, and instead of telling me, he used that information to manipulate both of them. He threatened Daniel with exposing the affair and demanded money, and he used me, his own sister, as cover, pretending he needed help, pretending he was broke, while secretly blackmailing a man for sleeping with my wife. And the worst part is my wife knew she knew what he was doing, and she let it happen because she was too scared to stop it or too deep into it. I don't know which, and now I was in the middle of something way bigger than a family betrayal. This was manipulation, this was extortion, and maybe even something criminal. So I confronted her, and when I told her what I found, she broke down completely. She said it started at a work event. Daniel flirted with her, she flirted back, they got drinks, things escalated, one time turned into two, then more, and eventually she found out she was pregnant. She didn't know what to do. She panicked, and before she could even process it, my brother somehow found out and used it against her. She said he showed up one night with screenshots and said if she didn't play along, he would ruin everything. And in her words, she didn't tell me because she was afraid of losing me, afraid I would hate her. And part of me did. Part of me wanted to walk out again and never look back. But another part of me wanted to fix it somehow, even if it was already broken, because despite everything, I still loved her, and that made everything worse. So I made a decision. I told her I needed time, and she agreed to move out for a while to stay with a friend and figure things out. And then I turned my attention to my brother. I told him I knew everything, and for once he didn't lie. He just sat there smirking like he was proud, like he thought he was smarter than everyone. And he said something that made my skin crawl. He said, "You always thought you were better than me, but look who's in control now." And it was in that moment I realized he never cared about family or loyalty or right and wrong. He just cared about power, control, winning, and using the people closest to him to get ahead. And I decided right then that he wasn't going to win, not this time. So I started gathering everything, every screenshot, every file, every message, and I built a timeline of what happened and how, and then I sent it all to Daniel, not because I wanted to protect him, but because I wanted him to know that I knew everything and he needed to come clean or face the consequences. Daniel responded within hours, panicked, scared. He begged me not to go to the police. He said he would do anything to make it right. And that's when another twist hit me. He said my brother had threatened his family too, that he had shown up at his house one night and warned him that if he didn't keep paying, something bad would happen. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about fear and control and danger, real danger. And suddenly I wasn't just dealing with a broken marriage or a manipulative brother. I was dealing with someone who had crossed a line so far there might not be a way back. I decided it was time to tell my parents everything. They had always protected him, always defended him, but they needed to know who he really was now. So we met at their house, and I told them the whole story, every detail, every lie, and at first they didn't believe me. They said I was being dramatic, that he was troubled, not evil. But when I showed them the proof, the files, the messages, the blackmail, the threats, they went silent. And then my mom started crying, not just because of what he had done, but because deep down she knew he had always been this way, and they had just refused to see it. And then something happened that I never expected. My father stood up, walked to the phone, and called the police. He said enough was enough, and that maybe jail would finally make him face the consequences of his actions. And as I watched him do that, as I watched the look of shock on my brother's face when the officers arrived later that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief, not joy, not justice, but relief, because maybe now the nightmare was finally ending. But it wasn't over yet, because there was still the baby and my wife and a future I didn't know how to face. And that part, the most complicated part, was still ahead of me. After my brother was taken away, everything went quiet for a few days, like the house itself was holding its breath. My parents were distant, ashamed, maybe heartbroken, and I was left alone in the silence with my thoughts and the question that wouldn't leave me: what do I do now? Because even though he was gone, the consequences of what he did were still here. The baby was still coming, the betrayal was still real, and my wife, the woman I once thought I would grow old with, was now someone I didn't know anymore. I didn't want to talk to her, I didn't want to see her, but one evening she came to the house, said she needed to talk, and I let her in. She looked tired, older, like the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders, and she sat down on the couch, the same couch where everything started, and said, "I have something else to tell you." And my heart dropped because I thought I had heard it all, but I was wrong. She said the baby might not be Daniel's either. And I just stared at her completely lost. She explained that before everything happened with Daniel, before she even knew she was pregnant, there was one night she went to a company retreat. She had too much to drink, and she wasn't proud of what happened, and she never told anyone because she was ashamed. And when she found out she was pregnant, she assumed it had to be Daniel because of the timing, and because he was the only one she had been with since then. But now, thinking back, she realized it might be someone else, and I asked her who. And she said she didn't know, not for sure, and that she was scared and that she didn't want to bring a child into this world without knowing the truth. And in that moment, something in me broke again, not with anger, but with exhaustion, because how do you respond to that? What do you say when everything you thought was your life turns out to be a web of confusion, shame, fear, and half-truths? And I realized that the truth might never come, not completely, and maybe I had to make peace with that. Maybe the closure I was waiting for would never be clear-cut, and still there was something inside me, something stubborn that refused to let go. I told her she needed to get a paternity test as soon as possible, and that depending on the results, we would decide what to do next, and she agreed. She said she wanted to fix things even if they couldn't be the same again, and she left, and for the first time in weeks the house felt like mine again, empty, but mine. I spent the next few days going through every room, every corner, as if trying to find pieces of myself that had been lost in all the chaos. And then the results came back, and the baby wasn't mine, it wasn't Daniel's, and it wasn't my brother's, it was someone else, someone unknown. And when she told me that, I didn't even flinch, because I had already detached my heart from the outcome. And in that moment, I saw her clearly, not as the woman who betrayed me, not as the liar, not as the enemy, but as someone who was broken too. And I told her I wished her peace, and that I hoped the baby would be healthy and loved, and that I couldn't be part of this anymore, not because I hated her, but because I needed to survive, and to survive I had to walk away completely. And she cried and begged and promised and apologized, but it was too late. Too much had happened, and love without trust is just a memory. And that was the real turning point, the moment I chose myself, not revenge, not bitterness, just peace and distance. And that choice was the beginning of something new. Something painful but honest, and that honesty was the only thing I had left to rebuild my life from scratch. After I walked away from her, I didn't expect anything more. I thought that was the end, that life would slowly calm down, and I'd just move on piece by piece. But life doesn't always let you go that easy, especially when so many people are still involved, so many secrets still floating in the air. A few weeks passed, and then one night I got a call from my mom. She sounded shaken, like she had been crying, and she said I needed to come over right away, so I did. And when I got there, my dad was sitting at the table staring down at a piece of paper, and my mom was pacing back and forth. She looked up at me and said, "Your brother sent a letter from jail, and he wants us all to read it together." And something about that made my skin crawl, but I nodded and sat down, and she opened the envelope and began to read. And what was inside wasn't what I expected. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was a confession, a detailed story about everything he had done, how he found out about the affair, how he used it to get money, how he manipulated Daniel and our family, and even worse, how this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. He admitted to blackmailing someone years ago, a girl from his old job who had trusted him, and he used her to threaten to ruin her unless she paid him to stay quiet. And the only reason he never got caught before was because she moved away and never said a word. And now here it was, all on paper, all the dirt, all the shame. And at the end of the letter, he wrote that he didn't know why he was this way, but that he hoped jail would change him, that maybe finally being punished would break the cycle and let him start over. And for the first time since this all began, I saw him not just as my brother, but as a broken person, deeply messed up in ways none of us wanted to see. And even though I didn't forgive him, I felt something shift inside me, not sympathy, but understanding, not acceptance, but release. And after we finished reading, the room went silent. My dad folded the paper, my mom wiped her face, and I just sat there feeling like I had just watched the final scene of a movie I never wanted to be in. And then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my wife, or I guess my ex-wife now. She said she was going into labor early, and she was scared and alone and didn't know who else to call. And at first I froze. Why would she reach out to me after everything? But then something told me to go, not for her, not even for the baby, but for myself, maybe to close this chapter once and for all. So I went to the hospital, and when I got there, she was already in the delivery room, and I waited in the hallway, pacing back and forth, just like my mom had been, and it felt surreal, like none of this could be real. And then a nurse came out and said, "Would you like to meet the baby?" And I didn't know how to answer. I just followed her, and there he was, tiny, helpless, innocent, and none of this was his fault. And in that moment, I felt something I didn't expect to feel, not pain, not anger, but calm. And the nurse asked if I'd like to hold him, and I said yes. And as I held that baby in my arms, I felt something change, a weight lifting. A part of me that had been clenched for so long slowly begin to open, and I looked at him and thought, maybe this is what starting over looks like, not erasing the past, not pretending it didn't happen, but choosing to be better despite it. And I told my ex that I wished them both well, and that I'd be there if she ever needed help. And I meant it, not because I wanted to go back to what we were, but because walking away with love is more powerful than walking away with hate. And as I left the hospital, the sun was rising, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again, like the worst was finally behind me. But then a few days later, something happened that reminded me life is never that simple. I got a call from a block number, and when I answered, a voice said, "Is this Mary?" And I said yes, and they said, "I'm calling about your brother. He was attacked in jail." He's in critical condition, and my whole body went cold because just when I thought it was over, here comes another wave, and I went to the hospital and saw him there, bruised, unconscious, hooked up to machines, and even though he did terrible things, he was still my brother, and seeing him like that broke something in me, and I sat by his bed for hours thinking about how we got here, how two kids who once played together ended up like this, and eventually he woke up and looked at me and whispered, "I'm sorry." And those words hit harder than anything else because for the first time they felt real, not manipulative, not calculated, just real. And in that moment I knew he was finally facing the truth, and maybe, just maybe, he could change. And maybe I could heal too. After that day in the hospital, everything inside me slowed down, like I had been running for so long, chasing peace, chasing answers, chasing closure. And suddenly I was just still. My brother was recovering slowly. The doctor said he would make it, but it would take time physically and mentally. And as much as part of me wanted to just walk away and leave everything behind, another part of me knew I needed to see this through. So I started visiting him. Not every day, but often enough. Sometimes we wouldn't talk at all, just sit there in silence. And I think for him that silence said more than any words could. And one day during one of those visits, he looked at me and said, "You should take care of the kid even if he's not yours." And I looked at him confused, and he said, "I know it sounds crazy, but you have more heart than anyone else in this family, and that boy deserves someone like you." And I didn't know how to respond because after everything he had done, he was asking me to be the one to clean up the mess. Again, to be the one who sacrificed again. And yet part of me understood what he meant, not because I felt obligated, not because I was trying to be a hero, but because that child was innocent, and the world had already given him a shaky start, and maybe I could be the one thing that stayed steady for him. And after a lot of thought, I called my ex and asked if she was open to that idea, and to my surprise, she said yes. She said she had been overwhelmed, scared, and alone, and that if I was really willing to help, she would be grateful. And that's how it started, slowly, awkwardly, but real. I started visiting the baby more often, bringing diapers, helping with feeding, just being around. And over time it felt less like a wound and more like a new chapter, not a fix, not a replacement, but a beginning. And one day as I held him while he slept, I realized something powerful. Everything I went through, every betrayal, every lie, every heartbreak, it had all led me here to this moment where I had the chance to choose what kind of person I wanted to be, and I chose to be kind, I chose to be strong, I chose to forgive, not for them, but for me, because forgiveness is the only way to set yourself free. And years from now, when that boy is old enough to ask about his past, I'll tell him the truth, but I'll tell it with love and with strength and with the message that no matter how broken your beginning is, you can still grow into something beautiful. And today my life is not perfect, but it's honest and peaceful, and mine and I still visit my brother. Sometimes he's getting better, slowly facing his demons, and I don't know if we'll ever be close again, but I know I did my part, one did what I could, and that's enough. And as for my ex, we remain civil, not friends, not enemies, just two people who shared something once and now share a child. And that's okay. Not everything needs a happy ending. Sometimes the best ending is finding your peace and choosing to live without bitterness. And if you made it this far, thank you, truly thank you for listening to my story. I know it's messy, I know it's heavy, but if there's one thing I hope you take from it, it's this: your pain does not define you, your past does not trap you, and your worth is not measured by the people who failed to love you. You are more than what they did to you, and you are allowed to heal. So that's my story, and if you're still here listening, it means something in this mess spoke to you, and maybe you've been through something similar, maybe you're going through it right now. And if that's the case, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us end up being the ones who hurt us the most, and that pain, it cuts deep, but it doesn't have to be the end. You can take that pain and turn it into something new, something stronger, something that belongs to you. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe that healing is possible, then I hope you'll stick around, because this channel is a place for stories like mine, stories that remind us how fragile and strong we can be at the same time. So please, if this video touched you in any way, leave a like. It helps more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe. We're trying to hit our next milestone, and your support means everything. And hey, there's another video right here on the screen right now. Click on it. If you want to hear another powerful story that might just change how you see things, will be waiting for you there.